In the very first task of Unit 1, we are going to define a concept known as cognition. Cognition, as you will see as the year progresses, is one of the key concepts that we constantly refer back to. Being the very first concept map you've ever made, the box in front of you has a few key details that will soon become second nature. First, you will notice that each essential task is numbered. It is numbered by the unit and then the task corresponding to that unit. Essential task 1.1 simply means that we are on the first essential task of the very first unit. To the right of that, you will notice the letters H and V in circles. That indicates that this concept map can easily be done on a piece of white paper held either vertical or horizontal. It truly doesn't matter. The information is presented in a way that's either short or presented in a way that can be held either. Finally, you'll notice the text of the actual task. In this case, it is to define cognition, with emphasis on what's called the cognitive revolution. You will notice that define cognition is indicated in yellow. If you've watched the very first video, How to Concept Map, you will note that before you actually get into the content of the day, there are a few key aspects of setting up your concept map so that they are appropriately designed, and so that going forward, when you refer back to them, it's really clear and concise exactly what information you're about to look at. The first is to label the number, in this case, essential task 1.1. The second is to copy the essential task at the very top of the piece of paper, regardless of if you hold it horizontal or vertical. However, you do not have to copy the entire text of the essential task. You only need to copy what is indicated in yellow. That's designed to get straight to the point and avoid you copying what can sometimes be rather lengthy essential tasks. This 1.1 task is not particularly long. However, I wouldn't ask you to copy some of the longer tasks like 3 and 4. It can get a bit monotonous. So in yellow, I have indicated the quantity of the essential task that I would actually like you to copy. As we progress into essential task 1.1, and this is the case every single time we transition, you will notice an overview of that day's essential task. This slide is designed to give you an understanding and an idea exactly how to hold your concept map, whether it's horizontal or vertical, and allow you to prepare ahead of time for the spacing that would necessitate an organized concept map. You will notice that this concept map is rather short. It's all indicated under the text of cognition. You will notice that there are 3 boxes on top of each other. That is the entirety of the information that you will find in Essential Task 1.1. Sometimes tasks are a little bit longer. For example, when we do Essential Task 1.2 on the concept of creativity, you will notice a little bit of a preview that concept map has about 4 boxes. There's a division after the first term, and it can be a little bit more complex. But as you see here in Essential Task 1.1, we have a pretty straightforward 3 boxes on top of each other. And quite frankly, the text of the boxes is not very long, which is why I recommend horizontal or vertical. When we enter into a slide, there are a few things to note. You will notice throughout the year that I have the term what or who or how or when indicated to the left of the box, usually in some type of differentiated color from the rest of the slide. In the case of Unit 1, vocab terms are at the top in red, and then terms like what or who will be indicated on the left in yellow. The very first term of the year, cognition, is a term that we use to reference a series of topics which we will cover all in Unit 1. Within Unit 1, particularly in the summer work, you will be talking about or learning about things like problem solving, decision making, creativity, and touch a little bit on language. When we return in the fall, we will cover topics like memory, which is in and of itself quite a lengthy topic. Cognition is a term that we use to capture all of those concepts, all under the umbrella of mental processes that you know happen, but you can't readily observe. For example, you know when you ask somebody a question about what they did yesterday, that they're using their memory of that episode of their life, pulling that information and reciting it to you. However, you don't have them under a brain scanner. They're not in an fMRI. They do not have an EEG attached to their head. You know memory is occurring, but you don't really observe it. Cognition is a term that we use for all of those mental activities that you clearly know are happening. When you ask somebody what they want for dinner and they have 2 options, they are clearly weighing those options. And the process of decision making in that case is precisely one of the subjects that we'll be getting into in the unit on cognition. Beyond the text of the slide, which you should copy down in your concept map, you might notice this giant letter M in the middle of the screen. This letter M is one of the many symbols that are used throughout concept maps in order to organize certain features. For example, the letter M stands for memory tree. As much as possible, I'm going to try and provide you with a series of memory tricks, or what they are more appropriately called mnemonics, that are designed to take some of the confusing terms that we covered this year and simplify it with some easy memory trick. If we were in class right now, I would be pointing to a statue that I have in my room. The statue is pictured on the right. That statue is formally named the Thinker. However, in my classroom, I am going to refer to that statue as Mr. Cognition. The reason I'm going to use the name Mr. Cognition is for the entirety of the year, when you see that statue, I want you to associate it with the concept of cognition. That individual in the statue is thinking. That's really a simple term in order to connect with cognition. This is really the study of thinking, whether that's how somebody solves a problem, makes a decision, uses language, exhibits creativity, or utilizes memory. Going forward, we'll be introduced to the second symbol. It is the history symbol in the top right corner. This symbol is not very common, but it is used to reference concepts that give you a good understanding of the overall scope of the course of psychology. Psychology has not always existed as a readily accepted science. It's really only a few hundred years old, and there have been many breakthroughs and transitions and shifts in the thinking of psychologists. The cognitive revolution is an example of one of those shifts. This isn't day one psychology, this is more several decades in, but in the 50s and 60s, there was a transition in psychology. You may have heard of names like Sigmund Freud, B.F. Skinner prior to taking this course. Their work existed either at the late 1800s or the early 1900s. The term cognition, and this idea of emphasizing the study of thinking, didn't really spawn into the 50s or 60s for a few different reasons. One of which was there was a breakthrough in memory, which we are going to reference shortly. And additionally, there were some breakthroughs in language, but also technological breakthroughs. Things like CAT scans and MRIs, and eventually fMRIs, were invented that allowed us to get a good understanding of what was happening in the brain when somebody was making a decision or utilizing memory. And as a result, all of a sudden, behaviors which were not really observable could be studied in a much more precise manner. As a result, we dubbed this time period the cognitive revolution, when all of a sudden psychologists began to really emphasize the concepts that we are going to cover in Unit 1. You do not need to copy down the timetable or the timeline that you see indicated below. That's merely to reference some of the events that you may have heard of prior to taking this course and put into context where the cognitive revolution fits. Psychology was considered a science in 1879. Major psychologists like Freud and Skinner, as I referenced, their work was in sort of the early 1900s. The cognitive revolution would come a couple decades later, starting in the 50s. The final concept indicated in Essential Task 1.1 is a concept that we call metacognition. We're going to do a lot of metacognition in this unit. Metacognition is essentially the concept of thinking about your own thinking. So, for example, when you evaluate what you are doing when you make a decision, or you evaluate how you came to a solution to a problem, whether that's how to fix your computer or a chess game or whatever it might be, you are utilizing what's called metacognition. Metacognition is in many ways the process of stepping back and evaluating what indicated why one strategy would be effective, why it worked, why it didn't work, and how you really can refine your own problem solving and decision making in order to more appropriately evaluate tasks in the future. We are going to use a ton of metacognition, especially when we get into the problem solving and decision making aspects of this unit, which will be coming up in Essential Tasks 2 through 4.